Now that COVID policies are no longer popular, Fauci is being used as a scapegoat for bad policies that were instituted during the COVID era. But Fauci is not the only person responsible. Everyone is responsible. All institutions failed. The political institutions failed. The media failed. The medical community failed. The teachers' community failed. Everybody failed, not just Fauci, and everybody should take responsibility for their failure. Fauci abused his power. Fauci had access to the highest echelons of power in the United States, and instead of sticking only to what he knew, the medical evidence of what he knew, Fauci made recommendations, yes, just recommendations that he knew and he intended to have outsized effect. So he didn't stick only to what the medicine said, what the science said. Fauci became the science. At some point, he said anyone who opposed him opposed the science. But he did not differentiate what he was saying, his opinion, his recommendations, from what the science actually said, which would have been the wiser thing. So Fauci did abuse his power. He abused his opportunity. He abused the fact that he had the ear of the people. He had the ear of the media. He had the ear of the president. He abused all of that. But Fauci was just one man. There was the media whose job it is to cross-check and balance out the government. They're supposed to be the fourth estate. Their job is to hear, but to also criticize, to critique, to think. But the media lost all of that. The media, like everybody else, succumbed to fear and tribalism. Anything that was done by one tribe was bad, and anything else done by the other tribe was good. The tribe that followed them, they made recommendations, they listened to the recommendations of Fauci and his people, and that tribe followed them behind. And because that tribe followed them and they make their money from that tribe, they stuck to their guns. The incentive structure was such that the media too supported whatever Fauci said. The media did not only just support Fauci, the media also ostracized anybody who said the opposite. They stopped listening to them. They propped up certain politicians within their tribe that supported their thinking and denounced and attacked anybody else who said the opposite. So the media too failed. Then we have the political class. Your job is to lead the people. Your job is not just to listen to what the people want. No, you're an elected official, but we elect officials because we expect them to be better than us in a particular thing. Your job is to make decisions even when the decisions are not popular. But politicians did not. Well, because now we have more politicians than we have leaders. Instead, politicians decided whatever the people wanted was what they did. So instead of telling the people in certain areas, you are wrong, the evidence doesn't support what you are saying, it doesn't support your opinion, the politicians, like the teachers' unions did, instead went with the sway. And they could afford to do it at the time because social opinion was on their side. So the politicians, like everybody else, held up people like Andrew Cuomo as the champion and denounced people like DeSantis, even though the evidence in both cases, when you looked at it, the evidence wasn't so much different. What Cuomo was doing in New York was not having a better effect than what DeSantis was doing in Florida. But one was propped up as a hero and the other one a villain. So the political class failed. They failed the people. And theirs is even worse because it is their job. It is your job as a politician to be able to tell the people no when they are wrong. But politicians have rejected that notion. Now everybody simply does what they think the most people want them to do. That's not your job. But they weren't the only failures. The teachers' unions failed too. The teachers' unions, well, their job, I guess, is to support the teachers, and that's what they did. They supported the teachers and not the kids. They succumbed to their fear and not to the evidence. Evidence told everyone that the vaccines that we had, the vaccines were good in making sure that you as the individual did not get sick, but they were not good in stopping the spread. But neither any of these institutions said this openly. They did not make laws accordingly. The evidence showed that airlines were actually, ironically, even I found it difficult to believe, but that airlines were actually one of the safest places to be in because they recycle the air, and so it was difficult for COVID to spread amongst them. But until very recently, the president kept up the mask mandate on airlines, on flights, even though there was evidence that the masks, as we used them at the time, were not effective in stopping or slowing the fear. slowing the spread. Now, I want to point out here that the only reason we did this as a community was because of fear. Fear. If you go back and you listen, you see everyone said we want to feel safe. It was about feeling safe. And we rejected or we looked down, did not consider the fact that many times you have to look beyond what you feel to what the evidence says in order to move yourself from where you are to where you need to be. And once you are where you need to be, then the fear subsides. But sometimes you need to go through that chasm, but they didn't. So the teachers' unions also failed. They failed the kids. They failed the teachers they were supposed to represent. But theirs isn't the worst. Like I said before, the politicians, this fell on them the most. Then the medical community was even one of the worst offenders, because the medical community, who were supposed to focus only on what the science said, they ostracized those within them who said the opposite of what was conventional wisdom. Their job was to look at the medical science and was to make recommendations made based on the medical science, but they didn't. They made recommendations based on tribes, changed opinions based on tribal thinking, based on fear. They succumbed to fear and tribal thinking like everybody else did. So this is not a Fauci thing. All the institutions failed, every single one of them. So the question now is not who is to blame, because we all are. The better question is, how do we avoid this in the future? How do we make sure in the future that dissenting voices are heard? How do we make sure in the future that we do not succumb to our fear, but we leave enough room? Because fear will also come, and believe me, this is going to happen again. But when it does happen again, how do we make sure that we are able to listen to the voices that are not the most popular? We are able to make decisions based on what is rational and what makes sense. How do we put leaders in place that are able to stand up to the people when they need to and say, no, this is not correct? How do we put people in media? How do we structure it? How do we incentivize the system to allow dissenting voices to speak? Now, dissenting voices will not always be right. There are people who dissent for dissenting's sake. There are people who dissent because it makes them popular. There are many reasons to dissent, but sometimes the reasons to dissent are correct. They are right. How do we make sure when dissenting voices are correct, we're able to listen to them? This is the better question, not who was wrong, because who was wrong was everybody. How can we all be right, or at least allow those who are right thinking in the future to have the opportunity to air their grievances? How do we restrict tech from restricting others from speaking when it counts, right? The argument being that you will spread harm. But the fact is, information needs to go around. You may like the information, you may not. But the danger of restricting information is you lead everybody into herd and groupthink, and you have worse off effects at the end. Nobody ever knows everything. Nobody in the position of power is superhuman. Nobody ever knows everything. Nobody ever measures and balances different values as effectively all the time. So you need to have dissenting voices. You need to have room enough for everyone to speak and to be able to hear people who dissent and who don't agree in order to make the right decision. How do we make this happen? This is the bigger question, not who was wrong.